One light, two lights, three lights, four lights, five lights, and it's go, 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 go!
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this latest episode of the Five Red Lights podcast. My name's Aaron, and let's dive into a look back at last week's Turkish Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton claimed his 7th World Championship, coming through from 6th place on the grid to win by 31 seconds. He headed a podium of Sergio Perez and Sebastian Vettel, who capitalised on Charles Leclerc's last corner mistake. Carlos Sainz came home 5th, while Max Verstappen and Alex Albon were left to rue a chance to win go begging. Valtteri Bottas crawled home 14th with a damaged car and a little bit of a dizzy head after 6 spins at the Istanbul circuit. The track surface played its part, and does Michael Masi need to watch his step? We discuss those in this episode of the Five Red Lights. The lights are coming on, so let's dive into the podcast. So, where do we start? We start with Lewis Hamilton, of course, because 7 times a world champion, equaling Michael Schumacher's record. Now, on a personal note, I'm going to start this on. Not a Schumacher fan as a young child growing up. I didn't agree with some of the things he did on the track. And as a young teenage boy in the UK, Lewis Hamilton coming through and taking the Formula One world by storm, I really took to him. So on a personal level, Lewis Hamilton winning 7 world championships and equaling Schumacher's record is really satisfying for me. But I think if you go from a more neutral perspective, you have to appreciate all the effort that he's put in and just how good he has become. He was obviously an outstanding talent when he first arrived on the scene in Australia in 2007, but to see where he is now, it's night and day. And this was a race that encapsulated everything that was Lewis Hamilton now. If he'd had this race when he was with McLaren or in his early days with Mercedes, possibly, we might have seen Hamilton make a rash choice, a chance to nail someone on the brakes and it go wrong. He might have overused the tyres. He might not have thought of playing the longer game. And that is exactly what he did in Turkey. He made a great start. Let's get that out of the way first, because in those sort of conditions, a good start, a good first lap can be the deal breaker or the deal maker. So look at Hamilton's fortunes compared to Bottas's and to Esteban Ocon as well, because Hamilton, starting 6th, made a brilliant start. I think he started in 2nd gear, as a lot of people did. I watched the onboard with Max Verstappen. He was starting in 1st gear. So when I saw him crawling away and then saw him in 1st gear, I looked at it back. It wasn't a surprise that one followed the other. So for Hamilton, he whizzed up the inside into 3rd place, and that was, astonishing because the Mercedes had not been able to keep any heat in its tyres throughout the weekend. So to see him steaming up the inside into turn 1 was quite a surprise, because I didn't expect him to go anywhere. Quite frankly, I thought he'd struggled in the first few laps. He made a mistake at turn 9, but it did set up his race, because he could have ended up in 3rd place, and then he could have wound it up. So that's what Mercedes had to do. They had to sort of wind up the jack in the box to unleash the performance within the car, and Lewis did that. Valtteri, on the other hand, he had his spin at turn 1, then he made another mistake. He charged up the inside of Leclerc, got a little bit too deep on the brakes. It was pretty desperate stuff for Valtteri, because he knew he had to make up ground and he took a risk. And this is where Valtteri and Lewis are separated for me. They're both brilliant drivers, but then you look at the decision making. Hamilton, he made that mistake at turn 9. Bottas made a similar error. He went in too deep. He didn't have the tyre temperature or the brake temperature, which is critical in those conditions. Hamilton lived to fight another day because he'd made a good start, and Bottas ended up creaming into the side of Ocon again, and it kind of ruined his race from there. He had damaged steering and he kept spinning round. So Hamilton's decision making And you could say it was lucky, but he'd put himself in that position, and he he managed to live for another day. Bottas got himself all caught up uh, in an accident, and that kind of ruined his race. So Hamilton, he looks after the tyres. He had to rebuild the temperature into the inters after actually being um, doing those laps on the wets and then ready to show that potential in the Mercedes, and then he had to stop again and then put on the inters. So he kind of had to do it twice. But if they just stayed on the wets, uh, I think he would have seen Hamilton come through a lot quicker um, than he did. But once he got into that battle with Seb, it was nice to see them competing again against each other. And in a way, it was nice to not have DRS. I think there was a slightly frustrating element in the fact that I thought DRS could have been enabled, but then I can understand that, and this is something we're going to get onto. The FIA race director Michael Masi decided it wasn't quite ready simply because offline there was no grip across the track. And we're going to talk about the track surface a little bit later on as well. Um, and you saw that early on because Hamilton he went wide and he lost the rear end and he lost places. And we saw several drivers do it. Leclerc on the last lap, even on the last lap, there wasn't quite enough grip on the inside. You still saw him lock up, run deep, and lose a position. Well, actually, two positions. Um, so for Hamilton, he looked after his tyres. He did a brilliant job conserving them. And then once the pace came to him, once the race came to him, and everything came in his direction, he then just went, okay, here I come. See you later, guys. And once he was in the lead, I don't think there was any doubt that he was going to win that race. The only thing that was going to stop him was having to pit again and rebuild the heat into the tyres or a late rain shower. And he chose not to stop again, uh, thinking back to 2007 in China where he slid into the gravel in the pit lane. Here he would have just slid straight into a wall, as we saw George Russell do. Um, and then the rain that they spoke about, as always, on the radio, we hear rain in 5 minutes or rain at the end, and hey presto, it doesn't arrive. So Hamilton got through all of that and clinched his world championship, his seventh world championship, in true champion style with a masterclass victory and to win by 31 seconds. Okay, in the rain, you can make up a huge amount of ground, but bear in mind he was 24 seconds behind um, about halfway through the race. So 24 seconds behind turned into a 31-second win is just astonishing. And even for a driver of Lewis Hamilton's caliber, it's incredible. If you saw Senna do that, or Schumacher, or Vettel, or any other of the huge number of great drivers that F1 has seen over its 70 years produce a wet weather performance like that, you just have to applaud. And I will applaud now because there's only there's only a select few drivers who are capable of that. And there's been so many drivers who have been in F1, and there's a small group who have won races, and there's an even smaller group who have won world championships, and there's only two who have won seven. And Lewis Hamilton is now one of them, and Michael Schumacher is obviously the other. So, what a weekend for Lewis! And in the end, his emotions came down on top of him, and I think for him being quite an outgoing personality, he ended up not fitting in a McLaren, and Mercedes have harnessed that personality within him. And this year, having to live in a bubble and sort of stay away from everyone and not be able to go and enjoy the things that he normally would, you can see that he's made that sacrifice to show just how much winning means to him. And you could see that all pouring out at the end of the race. If we see a drop off in performance, then I think we can all understand why, because he's had to sacrifice so much, as have all the other drivers. But Lewis has gone through, I wouldn't say a tough time, but he's had his battles on track and off track. There's been a lot going on for him this year. So for him to go and clinch that seventh World Championship in a year where he's been battling causes off the track, um, and obviously he lost one of his dogs, Coco. She passed away, and as a dog owner myself, that is nothing to shy away from. A dog is a real attachment, and obviously he had a bond with her, so all those feelings have come flooded out of him, and you know it's just a special moment for him. It's a special moment for us to enjoy watching and to say we were this is where we were when we saw it happen. It's just you you cannot underestimate the achievement of what Lewis Hamilton has done here. Uh, if he goes on to clinch eight, he'll fully deserve it. He will absolutely fully deserve it. The greatest of all time, statistically, yes, but it's just a matter of opinion. For me, he is the best. He is the best of the best. So let's talk about Red Bull, and we'll gloss onto Racing Point as well, because this race was one that got away from both of those teams, really. Uh, to start with, Lewis didn't really have any right to win the race. He won it through smarts, he won it through experience, and he won it through skill. But that said, Racing Point kind of threw it away, and Red Bull absolutely threw it away twice. So let's start with Racing Point. They started on pole position, and they had a car that warmed up its tyres brilliantly, but then they made the mistake with Lance Stroll to pit him again, and the tyres grained because the track was now too dry for Inters, and he then had no pace. But with Sergio Perez, they've copied the Mercedes strategy, but by this point they'd not actually built up enough of a lead. I think if they had allowed Sergio to pass Stroll earlier, when they'd seen he was catching him, if they'd brought Stroll in slightly earlier, perhaps they might have been able to get Sergio enough of a gap, or if they'd gone for that switch to Inters again, the second set of Inters earlier with one of them, they may have stood a bit more of a chance. But fundamentally, once the Mercedes got going, they were always likely to fall back. So they kind of lost the win. But you can't really criticize their decision making, because this is a team that's so often punched above its weight, and they really were punching above their weight by being 1-2 so long. And you have to commend Lance for his composure in the lead. But obviously, once it started going a bit pear shaped for him, I think he panicked. And Sergio, Mr. Reliable, brought the car home, P2. Possibly a win could have been on the cards, but once Lewis got into his stride, I don't think there was much stopping him. But what could have stopped him was Red Bull. Now, firstly, they threw it away with Max Verstappen. They said a couple of days after the race that there was an imbalance in the front aero. They made a mistake with their aero. So when they stop to change from wets to inters, you'll see the mechanics with the little twisty utensils, tools, and then they changed the angle of the front wing. And I think they went one side was 7 points of aero out from the other, which is huge. And then Max then attributed that to his mistake behind Sergio Perez. Now, on my notes, I've got, is Verstappen still too susceptible to seeing the red mist? And I really think he is, because this was another race where, and I'm going to compare it to one last season, where Max, he ended up driving with anger. And I think there was anger and a lot of emotion behind Verstappen's drive. He would have been absolutely convinced he was going to bag the pole position. He was on a double purple lap. He was about to go fastest of anybody on the wet tyres, and the team called him in. Now, I don't think he would have actually kept that lap as pole position. I think he might have gone faster, but the track might have gone even further towards the Inters. And we ended up with Lance Stroll on pole, which was a huge surprise. And Max, a lot of people had sympathy for him, and I can completely understand him as someone who's played not at a high level, but a competitive sport. I understand how he was feeling after qualifying. I can absolutely empathise with that, but I have no sympathy because he could also have said, "No, I'm going to stay out. I'm going to complete this lap," because you win and you lose as a team. You can't have it both ways. But I can understand why he would have been a bit cheesed off. He was disappointed to have missed out on that pole position because he would have felt that he had the pace to do it. Come race day, he needed to put that behind him, but I don't think he did. He made a bad start because he selected first gear rather than second. He should have been in second gear, and that's something the team should have been on top of. And then once he'd caught Perez up after the pit stops, to then, okay, he needed to take advantage of his run on Perez out of turn 9 and 10, but then to be so close through that kink in the wet on a slippery surface. And I spoke about Valtteri and Lewis and comparing their decision making, which can be the difference sometimes. And I really think that when Max has his emotions out of balance, like he did this weekend, in my opinion, he doesn't take the calculated option. He forgets all of that. He just goes, and there's just this. He is young, and there is this almost youthful teenagerness about it sometimes. And then it's like you'll wonder why he didn't win the race and why he made that error. If you look back to Mexico City last year, the yellow flags came out. He was already on pole position. He kept his foot in it, set a new fastest lap to extend his pole position advantage after Bottas had the accident at the last corner, loses the pole position and wonders why. He was upset. He was disappointed that he'd lost that pole, but it was absolutely justified. And he's not the first person to have been demoted for a yellow flag infringement in qualifying. He's not going to be wasn't the last. He's not going to be the last either. It happened to Lewis Hamilton. First race of this season, demoted 3 places on the grid from P2 to P5 at the Austrian Grand Prix. So no one is immune to it. And then he ended up having a little bit of a bashing match with Hamilton at the first corner, dropped back to P6, or was it P6? Might be P6 or P7, and then dive bombed Bottas in the stadium. Not really somewhere where you see overtakes, and that's something we love about these drivers. And Max and Lewis and Charles, they're capable of that sort of move. But you've still got to pick your battles. It's all right being capable of that sort of move, but sometimes when you, especially like in Mexico, you've got such a long straight with DRS, and in Istanbul as well, you had a long straight with DRS. Just be patient, patience. And I think Max is too impatient. He's got wrapped up in this Red Bull desire to win now and be challenging at every second and making everything, a big fight. Just relax. If he'd relaxed and stayed behind Perez, kept, in the tow, or even if he'd taken the wider line and not been in so much spray, I think he'd have had enough of an overspeed to close up in the tow. He'd have been able to maybe take the racing line, or just gently slide it down the inside, claim the corner, force Perez out wide, defend, and he would have been then after Stroll. And I'm pretty sure he would have gone on to win that race. I don't think Hamilton would have caught him because he'd have had enough time to build up that gap while Lewis was chasing him down, because he would then not have had to make that second stop for the flat spotted tyres. So his race ended up unraveling because he ended up having to stop, and then the track wasn't ready, was not compatible for new Inters. It needed slightly worn Inters that were going to wear down into those half slick, half Inter tyres that we saw at the end. And then his tyres grained, and then he had to go and get new ones. And then he had very fast pace very quickly out of the box, but then it faded away again. So it all just turned completely pear-shaped. His race turned upside down. And really, he can only blame himself for the Sunday afternoon performance, because he's the one behind the wheel. He's the one making those decisions. And it wasn't a bad pit stop that ruined his race. It wasn't a bad strategy call. It was his mistake, and he has to wear that and learn from it. He's got to, if he wants to be world champion, he has got to temper this aggression that, and it's not like he feels he's entitled. I think he just sees the big opportunity and almost demands of himself that he makes it his. And that's something people love about Max, but I think it's going to trip him up. And if it's a title battle, he's going to trip up if this happens, and it's going to cost him, and then he's really going to kick himself. But it wasn't just him who lost the race for Red Bull. Alex Albon had the chance to go and win. I thought the race was going to be his, because he was closing so much on the racing points, but he couldn't get past Perez, and then his tyres wore out, and then he spun, and his race unravelled from there as well. He ended up 7th behind his teammate, just so close to that big result again. And this time he didn't even need Lewis Hamilton to turn him around. Hamilton was closing, and Albon spun out of his way for him, so there was no need for contact. A real shame. It was a good performance up to that point, and he wasn't the only one to spin by any stretch of the imagination. Verstappen spun at the same corner later on in the race, I think in sympathy for Kimi Räikkönen, who spun at the same point. So, can you use it as a stick to beat Albon with? I don't think so. Does it help him keep his seat? Hard to say. Very, very hard to say. He's been given a stay of execution by Red Bull. Either they're hoping that Alex can make it work, or they have stumbled in negotiations with Perez or Hulkenberg, whoever they're talking to at the moment. So it's hard to say whether it's done him any favours, really. But what we do know is that Red Bull should have won that race in Turkey, and they didn't with either driver. And it's a win wasted at the end of the day for them. Okay, so let's just very quickly go through everybody else's afternoon. So we've spoken about Lewis Hamilton, how he was imperious by the end of the race. Valtteri Bottas, who's had his bad luck, but he's simply had a bad race last weekend. We've spoken about the two Red Bulls. Let's talk about Ferrari. They had a very strong showing. Charles Leclerc, he threw away a podium really on the final lap, but it was still an excellent drive for me. He made the switch to Inters at the right times, twice, and then just unlocked this amazing pace in the Ferrari and was just steaming through the field. Had he made a better start and been slightly higher up the order, running that strategy, he may have been P2 comfortably. He wouldn't have had to worry about passing Perez on the final lap. Maybe he could have even challenged Hamilton for the win, but that's unlikely. But a good display from Leclerc, but it did allow his teammate Sebastian Vettel to get back onto the podium, which could possibly be a springboard for 2021 with Aston Martin, and maybe they'll be wearing green overalls, kind of similar to my jumper today. Seb was on hand. He pinched the podium when Charles made the mistake, so well deserved. He also showed really good pace with the new Inters, managed his car well, kept himself out of trouble. There was no spins. If you'd said slippy surface, wet day, who's your favourite person to go and spin? At the moment, your money would have been on Seb, but there was none of that from Seb from last weekend, if I can get my words out properly. We've spoken about Racing Point. Lance Stroll, let's just say well done to him for that brilliant pole position. Hopefully next time he can finish slightly higher up than P9. And also, why is Sergio Perez not signed up for someone in 2021? Perhaps he should set up his own team. McLaren, Carlos Sainz, quietly and stealthily from 15th to 5th, and he's displayed all the reasons in one race why Ferrari chose him to partner Charles Leclerc in 21. Now, that's not to say that Daniel Ricciardo wasn't worthy of the seat as well, but Carlos did not put a wheel wrong, and he picked off his opponents to finish P5, made a lovely overtake on Daniel Ricciardo, and pulled off the same trick on Alex Albon. Lando Norris, he got the fastest lap. He didn't quite stand out as much as Carlos, even though his name did kept popping up at the top of the screen, but also a really good drive for Lando. Kept going the right way, gathered good pace towards the end, past Daniel Ricciardo and Lance Stroll, ended up P8. The Renaults, disappointing day for them. Ocon spanned twice on the opening lap, bumped with Bottas and with his teammate, recovered to P11. Should have been applauded, but it was a bad day for Renault because they lost ground to Racing Point and McLaren because Daniel Ricciardo could only manage P10, having started 5th, and I think Ocon was 7th. Yeah, 7th on the grid. They really could have done with much more, and actually, going into turn 1, they were 3rd and 4th, but Hamilton kind of snuck up the inside and caused some mischief. I think Ricciardo ran well, but just simply lacked that pace to go forward. He didn't really go anywhere, and then people who were going forwards, namely Carlos Sainz, they come and caught him, and Charles Leclerc managed to breeze past him through the pit stops as well. AlphaTauri, not good for them. They were pretty anonymous, really. They never really figured out how to get their car working on the tyres in wet or dry conditions. Couldn't generate tyre temperature or brake temperature. 13th for Gasly, 12th for Daniel Kvyat. Didn't really make any impact on the race. If there'd been more carnage up front, they probably would have scored some points and it would have looked a lot more rosy for them. But they didn't. So, they had a real high in Imola with Daniel's P4, but it's a bit of a bump down to earth for the AlphaTauri squad. Alfa Romeo, Raikkonen struggled from P8 on the grid, no real pace and a spin as well, ended up 15th. Giovinazzi, he crashed on the way to the grid and then the car broke down after a handful of laps, so one bit's his fault and the other bit isn't, so can't really make head or tail of that. But really, how is he still in that car next year? I don't get it. It's just a bit bizarre to me. I would much rather see Schumacher or Ilott or Robert Schwartzman in that Ferrari seat at Alfa Romeo. But it's up to Antonio to go and grab that opportunity with both hands. If he turns it on next season and shuts it all up, then fair play. But if he doesn't, then we can just say, we told you so. Haas, Romain Grosjean, he did his thing of spinning in qualifying and then he span again in the race, although he was clouted by Nicholas Latifi, and then he ended up retiring on lap 49. Again, slightly anonymous. Magnussen ran P10 on the opening lap and ended up in retirement. Did he retire? No, I think he was classified actually. Got it here on my notes that he retired on lap 55. I think it was a 58 lap race, wasn't it? So he might have just been classified 3 laps down. Had the pit stop issue with the wheel and had to be pushed back up the slope from the pit exit by the marshals. And that kind of ruined his race from there. Williams. This could have been a day where they scored some points, but in the end they finished last and DNF'd. Latifi struggled in qualifying and in the race, just seemed to constantly be facing the wrong way. And it was his car that led to the issue with the tractor in Q2, which we will speak about next, actually. George Russell, he crashed in the pit lane and then started from the pit lane on Inters. Didn't make any significant progress, even though he ran 11th at one point. There was no chaos to take advantage of, and he didn't really make any progress. Had a little bit of a bump with Lando Norris, who was making his way through. But at least he didn't spin behind the safety car this time. So positives, maybe. But yeah, that is your driver roundup for this week at the Turkish Grand Prix. Three, two, one. So, Michael Masi, why did you start qualifying two when there was a tractor still taking a car away? We've been here before. Now, this is serious stuff because the lessons have been learned from Jules Bianchi's accident. We've got the halo, we've got the virtual safety car, and they're here to stay. Then the halo's not going anywhere, no matter how much the cars now look like flip flops or people just dislike it. It's there for a reason, and I think we've very quickly got kind of used to it. The VSC, while it does kind of always seem to favour Lewis Hamilton because he's gone longer on the tyres than anybody else, uh, it's there for a reason. It's there just the same as the safety car to help remove debris from the track, to take a car away, to nullify any danger for marshals and spectators when they're allowed back in. But then to start qualifying two, having delayed qualifying one for something like 40 minutes. And bear in mind, they came out, Michael Masi, afterwards and said that he was entirely comfortable with his decision. But I don't think anybody else was, because cars going round on any track while a tractor is still moving a car away, and they're not at a contained speed like VSC or a safety car, it's just asking for trouble. And on the surface that we had at Istanbul, even if it was dry, would have been risky. But when it's in the wet, what on earth is going through his mind? Absolutely ludicrous. He claims, or he says, that the clerk of the course told him the tractor would be out of the way in 40 seconds. So he decided, well, it's going to take them about that plus a few more seconds to get round to turn 8. But it wasn't. I mean, why? Why take that risk? He is the man in control. The buck stops with him. He is the person who says we need a safety car or a virtual safety car or a red flag. And this is just another in a sequence of seemingly minor things at various points, but they're starting to add up. And having listened to other people's opinions on podcasts that I've listened to during the week and read articles, it's not going well. It's not going down well at all. Because why do we need to be seeing drivers put in this position? And marshals, they give up their time. They're not paid to do that job. You know, Martin Brundle has spoken several times about his accident in Suzuka in '94. He just about missed one of the trucks himself, exactly the same corner that Jules Bianchi went off, just slightly further round, the Dunlop curve at Suzuka. But instead, he was lucky in that he missed the truck, but he was unlucky in that he wiped out a marshal and broke his leg. The marshal's leg, that is, not Martin's leg. So the warning signs have been there since 1994. Then 2014, that's 20 years and later, and Jules has his accident, and we learn like that. We learn the lesson. The VSC is introduced the next season. So why are the marshals being put in that amount of danger? Had the first few cars gone round and gone off, had the rain been heavier or something, or the track just changed slightly, we could have been looking at something absolutely horrific. It's just outrageous. It defies belief. And for him to then come out and say that he was comfortable with his decision, it's borderline disgusting. Now, I think Michael Masi is a good race director. He is stepping into the role after Charlie Whiting, who, bless his soul, had he still been alive, he would have been worthy of a knighthood. As was Professor Sid Watkins, in my opinions, because those two have done so much for safety in Formula One. Charlie didn't always get it right. You can't always get it right, but you cannot justify putting people at unnecessary risk. Now that they could have played the oh, we were running out of daylight card, but then why didn't you restart Q1 earlier? If you were waiting that long, you could have waited another 40 seconds. You could have waited 1 more minute to start Q2. You could have waited until, okay, the track is completely clear, right, let's go. Because no one would have had a problem with that. No one at all. They'd have said, okay, tractor on track, moving that car away, that's fine, we will wait. Absolutely no problem. Once the marshals are back at their post, brilliant, great, let's go. Because the track is safe. The track was not safe. And at the end of the day, that rests on Michael Masi's shoulders. He's got away with it this weekend. He got away with it in Mugello as well with the safety car restart because the drivers weren't happy about that. Okay, we've never been to Mugello before, but then why, again, play that risk? Why? There's no need for it. And again, in Turkey, it was an even bigger risk because, as we're about to discuss, the track surface was uh, it was treacherous. It was a minefield just waiting to catch any unsuspecting driver out. Michael Masi needs to watch his step. He needs to be more. I'm not really sure what he needs to do more of because it's just such an obvious error. It's something that should never have happened. We should not have seen this. So I think if we see it anything like this again, there will be uproar from drivers, from teams, from fans alike, and Michael Masi is going to have a really, really big problem, and the FIA might find themselves with a big decision to go and make. So let's conclude this episode of the Five Red Lights podcast with a little bit about the track surface in ICE-stanbul, which is not a very subtle pun on the track surface there. Was it a hero or was it a zero? Because I think, wet or dry, it would have given us a very interesting race because you'd have had in similar ways to Formula 2, where they're not allowed the tyre blankets. I think, had it been a dry race, you'd have had drivers coming out of the pits and suddenly going, oh my God, I've got no grip, I've got no temperature, and they're trundling round. And all of a sudden, the overcut would have become immensely powerful. But if you had suffered graining or you were sliding and wearing the tyres too much, or you set up the car and then all of a sudden the tyres came into temperature and the temperatures went through the roof, you may have found yourself becoming unstuck. And there may have been several different strategies that could have found a way to win the race, depending on what car you're in. We didn't get that. We got a wet race, which made things extra interesting because a wet race is always fun. And we didn't get too much overtaking to start with, and that was because of the track surface. We didn't have grip offline like you would in a normal wet race. So if you think back to the Hungarian Grand Prix, we had the wet start. Generally, it's one line all the way around there. But you go around the outside of turn one and you'd pick up some grip and you got a good traction out of there, good exit. And again, you would have found that through turn two, going around the outside, going offline, breaking up the inside, going wide, and then following the outer radius of the corner would have benefited you. But there was none of that in Istanbul. And the big overtaking opportunity is down the slope into turn 12 at the end of the big straight. And you saw everyone thinking about it, and then thinking better of it and saying, no, it's a better option just to keep the car on the track and live to fight another day. We saw quite a few cars slipping and sliding in different places. And the off-camber turn 4, the left-hander into the right-hander from turn 3, the left-hander turn 3 and the right hand going down the hill and towards turn 5. It's off-camber and it caught a few drivers out. Caught Latifi out, Albon, Verstappen, Raikkonen, and these guys are no mugs. So for them all to be caught out tells you just how tricky the corner was. As a general rule, I don't think that sort of track surface would go down well. But if you had it thrown in every so often, maybe the FIA half fund one track to have a late notice resurfacing, then we might be on to a bit of a winner. The trick will be keeping it secret and disguising where that's going to be. So it's something that could be looked into, but it does have its pitfalls. And as we've just spoken about, there is a risk with all of this. We don't want to see people put in danger, but then that is down to decisions that are made. It's not always just down to the track surface. But then I think also if we'd had a dry race, the tyres would have been far too hard, and that's kind of why they weren't getting the temperature into them. So with a softer tyre, they would have been fine. I think, as we saw with the Inters, once they've worn down and were starting to bald, then because they're a softer compound, they kept the heat a bit better, and the lap times were excellent. I actually predicted last week before the race that the lap record of a 1:24.770 from 2005 was going to be shattered. How wrong was I? Here's the goal, and there's my shot somewhere over there. So track surface made things interesting, but it wasn't a hero in terms of how the race set up. But it wasn't a complete zero. It made things quite interesting. Definitely not something that Formula One should be following as a rule or something they should be chasing at every single circuit. So that is my thoughts on the Turkish Grand Prix weekend. Thank you for watching. If you're watching the video, which will be up on YouTube, thank you for listening. If you've got this far on one of our podcast platform providers, and the one of your choice, it could be Google, it could be Spotify, it could be on Anchor, where I create this podcast. Wherever you're listening, however you're watching or consuming this content, thank you for choosing us and for listening. I'd love to hear your opinions on the race itself, on whether Michael Masi should be kept as the race director or if he should be looking over his shoulder. Your thoughts on the track surface, and is Lewis Hamilton the greatest of all time? Is he the best driver F1 has ever seen? I'm going to leave a link in the description to all of our social media. So follow us on Twitter, which is @5_red_lights. Find us on Instagram. Find our website. We're on YouTube. If you're already watching there, you already know where it is. But if you haven't, check it out. It's 5 Red Lights. And find us there. Give us a subscribe. Give the videos a like. We've got some other videos. Check out the top 3 performers video to see who came out on top there. And I will see you next week, where we have a look ahead to the Bahrain Grand Prix, which is the first of a double header at the Sakhir circuit. We've got the usual Grand Prix layout before the not an oval the week after. Thanks for watching and listening. My name's Aaron. This has been the 5 Red Lights, and that is the checkered flag.